Hey, is the Iran war making any sense to you? Why did the US attack Iran? Why is Iran negotiating? Why are we in this mess?
What the fuck is this?
The real strategy and objectives remain obscure even today. So this video is going to be a little impromptu, and for that reason you don't really get to see the regular set and a lot of background noises, so bear with me. I'll speak into the mic so you can stick around. See, over the weekend I was going to make a different video. The video was going to be about how India was going to be the biggest casualty of the war. And my research was basically showing that India relies heavily on the Strait of Hormuz for some of the most critical things like oil, pharma, fertilizers, things without which, even if they get expensive, the Indian economy will not survive. And that got me thinking, like this whole thing could have been avoided. This is one of the most predictable outcomes of the war, is the closure of the strait. So it's almost as if someone wanted India to suffer from the closure of the strait, right? It was weird, but then it got me thinking. This whole thing cannot just be a series of blunders. It cannot just be Trump being a doo-doo dum-dum.
Guy's a world-class air.
Right? There has to be a reason why there's so much persistent momentum and effort into making this conflict happen. And as I thought about it, and I thought about the subject of my video, a theory started to come into play. So I want to share with you this theory of conspiracies. And I want you to tell me at the end, does it make any sense to you? Am I just rambling with a brain fueled with nicotine, or is there any legitimacy to what I'm actually saying? Let's start with Iran, actually. Iran is the casualty of the war, right? They are the victim here. And this whole thing could have been avoided if they were just left alone. In fact, I would say this whole mess could have been avoided even if they had been left alone in the 50s and 70s. But the US has really had it for them, and so has Israel. There's a long history over there, from like assassinating scientists to putting in a police state to just constantly trying to sow chaos and usurp whatever structure they have going, and then sanctions and nuclear sanctions. And in the end, what we have is the latest version where they're trying to do nuclear weapons as a way to have that nuclear deterrent, but also as a negotiation factor. Like, okay, US, you can put sanctions on us, but if you don't want us to have nuclear weapons, remove the sanctions.
It will be used only for medical research and clean energy. It will, and will certainly never be used to attack oh boy.
And it's sort of an asymmetric negotiation because Iran can never really be as big or do as much damage globally as the US. So they need to have some leverage to negotiate. And the Strait of Hormuz is the same thing, right? That has always been their threat. Like, if you mess with us, we'll close it, and then all your allies in the region suffer, your petrodollar collapses. So don't do that. And that's why no US president before has ever done it.
Number one, I'm not stupid, okay? I can tell you that right now. Just the opposite.
What's even more peculiar is their behavior in this war. They've been controlling the escalation, only doing tit for tat. Last year, in 2025, remember when they had the Israelis and the Americans, the notorious two, as I'll call them for this video, they went in and bombed quite a few sites in Iran, right? And Iran just basically phoned ahead. They were like, all right, we're going to hit these places, no casualties. They're letting you know in advance, and we're going to do this. And they did. Nothing happened, right? It was just like, I can't take this lying down, so I'm going to throw a punch. I'm telling you where I'm going to hit you. Just be ready, and don't make sure no significant damage happens, so we can just stop escalating and I can save some face. So what happened now, right? Even in a full-blown war where more than 2,000 people, civilians, have died in Iran, they're still controlling the escalation. They could have gone way harder. They're still retaining most of their capabilities and not just going scorched earth after Israel, right? They're still holding back. They could have gone, with that same intensity after the aircraft carriers, but they haven't. They're still trying to, in every chain of escalation, trying to leave a way back to de-escalation. And that has really surprised me because I never expected them to do that. I was like, all right, their leader's been assassinated, their targets are being hit, their infrastructure is collapsing. They should, at least according to me, attack at this point, because the longer they wait, the more their supply chains get disrupted. So eventually they're just becoming more and more vulnerable for the eventual ground invasion that the US could do on them. And that seems to be the strategy as well, right? Like, you just make the enemy supply chain as brittle as possible, so they lose that home turf advantage. But no, Iran has been very particular with how they're escalating. So let's just look at that, right? Iran does not really want this war. Is all we get to see for the last few decades. They might consider as countries their enemies, but they're more focused on themselves. They just want the sanctions gone. They want to be left alone. That's what we're seeing. But there's a particular attack that I want you to focus on. It's the attack on Diego Garcia. It was way further than whatever missile capability that was expected out of Iran. Iran was never expected to have the missile technology to hit that far away, but two ballistic missiles, reached Diego Garcia. And this is very interesting because the US didn't make a big deal out of it. Iran, who should technically be taking credit and just trying to, puff up their chest and tell the Americans to back off, were like, no, we can't do that. That's not us. And instead, Israel went ahead and was telling Europe that, hey, you guys should come in because that missile could have reached London as well if they just changed the direction. Now, Israel is the other player in this war, and they are very pro-war. For quite a few years now, they've been fighting. No amount of atrocities, no amount of, I would say, bloodshed is enough for them. There's no real objective as to what they're doing either. They're just fighting. I can't tell you why they exactly do all those tortures and sexual violations of Palestinians, but what I can talk about is why are they fighting?
My people, the Jewish people, emerged from the depths of hell.
See, I'm not going to buy into that, oh, Bibi just wants to stay in power, avoid jail. No, that, sure, could be true, could be conveniently true, but we see the whole government and population move behind him. And the reason for that has more to do with just him going to the jail.
They strew, scatter and smash rice, flour and other much-needed food. These Israelis are determined to prevent this aid from reaching Palestinians in Gaza.
So there's two reasons, I would argue, that this whole thing is converging onto, and which makes Israel just being a warmongering criminal state kind of just be a reality. The first one, of course, is that if Israel is the only prosperous country, if Israel becomes the Middle Earth of the Middle East, it's a China reference, you can read it up. It's the same philosophy, however, that if you are the one that's the most prosperous, the most stable, and all your neighbors are just busy, living in rubble and reliant on you for handouts or just fighting amongst themselves, then you have prosperity, right? And of course in exchange for theirs, but you will be prosperous. But let's also talk about their eschatology. See, for Jews, they have a coming of end times, just like the Christians. And their end times revolve a certain story. Now, the story requires a global spread of Israeli control, as well as anti-Semitism, and then there's a whole series of events and certain things that have to happen, like the Temple of Solomon that has to be made.
One of the principles of Jewish faith is that one day a man is going to rise up. We call him Mashiach, or the Messiah, and he's going to bring the Jews to the land of Israel. He's going to build the third temple, and he's going to inspire all people to strive to be their best.
But the point is, the approach being taken right now is not that, oh, the world will play out in this way. They're saying, hey, we just want it to happen right now. So what we're going to do is just make sure that those events happen. And because at the end of the story, God is going to come and give us salvation, he'll be forced to come because he just made everything happen, right? It's a reverse causality, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, especially for a lot of us older cultures. This is just stupid. But when you're an ardent believer in something, just a loose story like this is enough to give your life purpose. So for hardliners, why not? This can definitely be a motivation, and it is. Despite all the milk and honey that the Israeli government likes to give to the rest of the world, hiding behind, oh, we're just doing it for self-defense and we're the good guys. If you just look at what they talk to each other on national television, they're very honest. They just consider everyone as animals beneath them. If you're not from their faith, you are just even worse than animals. No matter how you get treated, doesn't matter because you're not God's child. It's very, very barbaric.
לא אשכח את הרצח בזוועה, תראו עכשיו כמה הם מוגי לב,
But anyways, I'm not here to criticize the people today. I'm not here to criticize the government. Well, I'm ready to criticize the government any day, but not right now. Right now, I just want you to understand that Israel as a country is pro-war. It's domestically, spiritually, and economically. It's working on a plan, and we see this happen, that the Pax Judaica is something that is actively being worked on. Now, Israel makes one of the notorious two, but for the second one, the US, this is very weird. Why are they here? They gain nothing from this war, and in fact, they could lose quite a bit, right? The petrodollar is under threat, and they don't want that. But the US elites, the machinery will not move with so much momentum in a direction that does not have a greater cause, because the Americans are very, very strategic. They never go to war with countries that they believe they can lose against, never go against big countries to begin with. They'll at least have a coalition. And, of course, they've always gone after smaller, weaker countries, but that hasn't always resulted in them winning. But the best thing is they never lose, never suffer any ill consequences from war. If two, kingdoms went to war, one of them would get ravaged if they lost. But with the US, they can go to war, make a mess everywhere else, and then just retreat to their continent. But they don't do it without a plan. They are always decades ahead with their planning of how the world will turn out, so they can position themselves favorably, and they have done so. That's the reason they are the leaders, at least right now. As the global hegemony changes, things will change, but for now, they are an undeniable force. So why are they here? Before we touch on the US again, let's talk about the Ukraine-Russia theater. I'm going to go on a little tangent, but I'll bring it back to our main topic, all right? I want to talk about the Ukraine-Russia theater. See, Ukraine and Russia were having a peace treaty, some negotiations going on in the start of 2022, but Boris Johnson went in and said, hey, nope. Don't get peace, go to war, win back what you lost, Zelensky. And that's what happened. Ukraine backed out of the discussions, went to war, and it's basically been destroyed since, right? I know it depends on what media you're reading. If you're reading Western media, Russia ran out of people and money and tanks in like 2 months. And then if you're on the East, then you've probably heard that Ukraine has run out of people and is conscripting people in their 40s. It's depends where you are. The ground reality is going to be something different, but it's not really who's winning the war. It's why are we fighting? Why did NATO want Ukraine to fight Russia? And why has it been fighting through it in a very particular manner? See, this isn't an all-out war. The NATO alliance didn't immediately just give them all the money, all the people and arms and ammunition, and just have them take over the territory, end the war, call it a day. No, Russia also didn't do that. They, sure, at one point encircled Kyiv, but they've never really tried to go and get more than they could or should. It's been a very interesting war. It's been a war of attrition. See, once the war started, Zelensky, and I'm sure you guys remember this, had to systematically privatize all of Ukraine's public resources. At one point, Trump even had Zelensky give contracts to American companies. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. All that happened was Zelensky would go around begging for money and, arms and ammunition, then he'd get around. And they'd burn it out. Then he'd keep doing this over and over and over, and it's been happening. This is a war of attrition. No side wants to win the war. They want to burn resources on both ends. Russia is burning NATO resources, and NATO is burning Russian resources. No side is seriously fighting the war, except the Ukrainians. They are the sacrificial lamb. I feel sorry for them. I hope this had never happened, but it is what it is. But it's not the point that what is happening over there. It's the fact that as soon as the strait closed, Ukraine went ahead and started to attack, seriously crippling the Russian oil exports. So, as we discussed, why did NATO wait for this exact moment? Why did the US, by extension, wait for the exact moment when the strait is closed, the world needs Russian oil? They could have done this any time, right? Zelensky says, oh, Russia could benefit from the war. Well, they have been benefiting from the sale of Russian oil for the last couple of years as well. He could have done that then. He could have done that a week before the strait's closure, but he didn't. He waited till it closed. And that tells me it's very important that oil gets choked. NATO wants oil to get choked. Oh yeah, talking about oil, the Australian oil refineries are getting hit. I just read about that recently. And do you know what Australia does with most of its oil? It exports it. To whom? Asia again. Now, I don't know what happened at the refinery, but it is very hard to blow up a refinery or just have an accident of that scale. And it gets timed right when the closure has happened. If I was to bet $1, I would bet that the CIA was behind it, but I don't know. I don't know, right? This is not something, it's one of those Diego Garcia things again. No one's making a big deal about it, but the timing, beautifully. This could have happened anytime, but it happens when the strait is closed, when a pressure has to be put on the economic markets, especially not to the North Americans, not to the Europeans who are now being told to buy oil from the US. It's happening to Asia. Asia is being very specifically pinched off. And that's what I'm seeing happening with Russia, happening with Australia, happening with the Strait. And I thought India was going to be the biggest casualty. No, India is collateral. The rest of Asia is collateral. China is the target. Closing the Strait has put a pressure of oil. That is transportation. A pressure on sulfur. That's pharmaceuticals. A pressure on fertilizers. That's food. Pressure on helium. That is semiconductors. Everything China needs, it relies heavily on the Strait or on Russia or Australia. But of course, Australia will not go any different from the US. It's a lapdog of the CIA. So Russia is now being taken care of by Ukraine. And everything else is being taken care of by Strait of Hormuz. Now it makes sense why the US gave India a waiver, and I think they might be extending it soon, on buying Russian oil. It has to, because India is not the target. In fact, India has been very desperately humping and hugging Trump and Bibi. And this is our Prime Minister speaking in Israel.
Israel is their fatherland, and India, their motherland.
Brother, what's that?
And this fact gets compounded when you learn that China was the one that took Iran to the negotiation table. At least this time when Vance was there. Iran was ready to fight more. They wanted escalation so they could be more in control of the war, but China said no, negotiate. Iran said no, we don't want a ceasefire, we want an end to the war. And China said no, ceasefire is good as well, we want that. Why? Because they are the ones hurting the most. Now imagine, this whole war is not a blunder. It's not a mess. It might look like that, it might be reported by that in the common media, but it's not. It's being done very purposefully because that is the plan. It's to hurt China. It's to pinch China. Now, if you see it with that perspective, a lot of noise doesn't look like noise, does it? I should think the reason we even have the ceasefire is because Trump is personally losing a lot of favor domestically. See, Zelensky, they're TV personalities. They like to curate an image. And Trump isn't liking that. Domestically, nobody likes the fact that this war is happening. So, what does he do? He wants out. But nobody else does. So he wants to kind of say, oh, we've won, let's head back. And the rest of the machinery behind him, the swamp, he used to call it, they don't. They want the war to go on because that is the plan. This has been the plan. Getting China under control has been the plan for what? Since the 90s at the very least. So, what do you think is going to happen? This war is going to come to an end? This ceasefire is going to last? No, it's not going to. Trump is looking for an out, and I think China is helping him here. They're like, okay, yeah, sure. And maybe Trump would like to negotiate with this leverage because everyone's wondering, he's going to go to China soon, right? He's trying to negotiate a deal or something. The US has no leverage on China, but now it does. So, the way I see it, these ceasefires and everything, they're just Trump trying to find a way out, because I saw something very interesting happen. As soon as the ceasefire was agreed upon, guess what happened? Domestically, every single Republican influencer who sat through, accepting Trump as a fraudster, right, running Ponzi schemes, pyramid schemes, rug pulls in bitcoins, and then being, a sexual assaulter, he's been convicted. He's a felon on those charges, not just like, hey, I robbed the store once or something. No, he just really is a creep, just a fucking loser of a person in any way. But they sucked him off and cheered for him. They've accepted him in every shape and form forever. So why did they, all of a sudden, as soon as the ceasefire goes into effect, back off? Now everyone is being critical of him, even the very people who were promoting him in the domestic circles. Why did Tucker Carlson suddenly get a backbone? Huh? Did he not see everything else that we saw so far? Makes no sense. But it makes you wonder, why did everyone suddenly turn the same way at the same moment? Because the ceasefire, if I was to, be a man who doesn't believe in coincidences, would say that the ceasefire is not favorable to the people who are funding these people, which would be the only country we realize who really wants to stay in the war.
Shalom.
Professor Zhang actually talked about transnational capitalism. I think it could just also be that. It doesn't have to be the cabal. It could just be those guys, because they want profits. They're investing in the political future, the future hegemony on the planet. So they might just prefer things to be one way or another. But who controls what, that's more of a deeper dive that we'll get into later. But what I want to say is, bring the whole picture together, is that this war is not coming to an end. The ceasefire is not going to last. This is part of a much, much grander plan. See, if you've read this book called Dragonfire by Humphrey Hosky, I believe. I'll put an image up here. Great book. See, it's a book written using war game simulations from, I believe, the West mostly, US, UK, stuff like that. He used to be a BBC correspondent, so he wrote a fictional book. The names, the who's, the whens are fictional, but the what and the why are very, what I would say, prophetic. It's what in the 90s the Americans expected the world to play out as. And it turns out majority of the war games just predicted that, hey, the US will have to fight China at some point, and so India has been groomed, say for example, as a lapdog to do just that. It's going to fight the US on its behalf. It's going to be the one, taking the brunt of the war, being the one physically fighting it, and then the US can sit back and, attain prosperity. But how do these things happen? How does this whole game get set up? That's what this book is about, and I would highly recommend you guys read it. But it basically just tells you that even in the 90s, this whole team of the US fighting China, slowly, subtly, one piece of chess or one piece of Go at a time, that's what we're looking at. This Iran war is just one theater on a larger map, just as the Ukraine-Russia war is. They're not individual, isolated incidents. It's part of a bigger pattern that is eventually leading to World War III, I guess? Who knows? But anyways, that's my working theory right now. I was able to piece it together, and a lot of things that I was considering as noise, as irrelevant or isolated incidents, suddenly started to come together and made a lot more sense, with especially the, as I said, the broader aims of the hegemonies and world powers that have existed for a few decades now. Anyways, I've yapped for too long. I really hope this video isn't too long. I hope it's 5-7 minutes. I didn't plan for it to be that long, but I've recorded for 30 minutes at this point, so I hope it's small, I hope it's entertaining, and I hope it contributes a bit to your cognitive thinking. I try to stay away from politics most of the time because I find it to be useless. Like, we could be spending all this time, energy, and money just being prosperous, finding happiness and doing meaningful things with our lives, making the world a better place, but we don't. So I try to stay out of it. I find it ugly and stupid, but I can't really ignore the world when it's burning, and so here I am talking about it. I won't do more. I'm going to sit back and watch. I'll try to refrain from making any more political videos. This is going to be the end of it. Right, we'll talk more sciencey stuff. I'm planning a video on AI, so we'll stick around for that. And anyways, I did say at the start, tell me what you thought about everything I told you. Did it make sense? Did it help you in some way, or am I just rambling away because I smoked too much? Let me know. See you around.